No, it's not here.
No, it's not yet. Okay.
Oscar?
Yes, Matthias?
I can't see myself.
You can see yourself?
I can't.
Oh.
And
Wow.
But you can see us.
I can see you, but I think I might have pressed something which...
But you look so well. Don't
Yeah,
worry.
we can. Yeah, we can see you, Matthias, but yeah, we can see you. It's
That's
not
fine. That's fine.
To be honest, I don't know how to fix it. So
as long as you can see me, that's fine.
Okay, cool. That's cool. Last time I was in a workshop about the growth, and they have music in the beginning. It was quite weird. So it was like classic music. So you feel like some tension before the starting of the workshop. So maybe tomorrow we can try, Gabriel.
I think so.
Some pasillos, bambucos.
Ah, nice. Very nice.
It could be very nice indeed. Yeah.
We can show that. It's music from our mountains. Pasillos, bambucos.
They are very nice.
Yeah. My favorite music.
Oh, there we are. Okay, I can see myself now.
Okay. You could fix it basically. Okay. So we have right now 23 participants. So now in theory is the time to start the workshop, but I want to wait like 5 minutes because it was registered around 35 people. So we can wait 5 minutes. Maybe people are trying to get in and then we can start. Is that fine? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so, Oscar. It's okay. We have here Ismael. Ismael, hi. How are you? And Johan, he appears some minutes ago.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Hello, Ismael.
Good afternoon there, Ismael. Good morning here.
I see Christian Matti in a very nice terrace by the beach.
Yeah.
Yes, I guess you missed that, Ismael, now, this kind of
Long time, good to see you.
I missed them as well, yes, so that is why I put in there.
Not Valencia, you're not in Valencia now.
No, I'm in Brussels, yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, I missed Spain this summer. The COVID didn't allow me to go to Spain for holidays, so I switched to Berlin. So yeah, I'm just trying to keep the Mediterranean element somehow, even in the background, whatever, doesn't matter.
Virtual background. Gabriel, I think that we have all of the participants. Time. We have 34 people. So if you want to start, please.
Yeah.
The floor is yours to say hello.
Okay, it's okay. Well, hola, buenos días, buenas tardes from Medellin, Colombia. You are so welcome to the first workshop on transformative metrics. Please let me present myself and my colleague briefly. My name is Gabriel Vélez Cuartas. I am the director of the Social Science and Humanities Research Center of the Universidad de Antioquia. I coordinate a collaboratory experience for computational social science in my university, and I am associate professor of sociology. Oscar Romero, he is here with us, and soon he will be explaining to you the dynamic of our workshop. He is a PhD candidate at Utrecht University. He works with Johan Schott in different projects related to experiments on transitions. The International Organization of Deep Sea and Latin America have activities and many other tasks in where he is involved. My other colleagues that help us in the organization of this event are Matias Ramirez. I will introduce him later because he is one of our interviewed subjects today. Eliana Martinez from the Vice Chancellor Office. She is mainly a health worker and she has a vast experience in consulting of regional governments in Colombia around strategies for change. We want to thank Marta Liliana Marin and Mauricio Dominguez, who helped with some session moderation. Also for us, it is imperative to thank all the efforts of our commentators, Luciano Gallón, Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana, Christian Mati from Climate Geek, Carmen Bueno, Universidad Iberoamericana, María Luisa Schenhagen from the Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana, José Luis Molina from Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, Pablo Patiño from Universidad de Antioquia, Alejandro Balanzó, who is from Universidad Externado de Colombia, and Eliana Martinez, our colleague from the University of Antioquia. We would like that this meeting had been in different mode. Perhaps after our sessions, we could walk in a near Andean forest. For example, we have here an example before me, enjoying endemic birds songs, for example. Maybe in a cheeky attitude, you could dare to eat a massive dish that we call bandeja paisa, with many different kinds of sausages, beans, adding eggs, rice, fried plantain, and more. But perhaps without these restrictions, it would have been impossible to receive so many different contributions from many different geographies worldwide. On behalf of our Vice Chancellor for Research, Sergio Cristancho, and our Dean of the Social Science and Humanities Faculty, John Mario Muñoz, from the Universidad de Antioquia, we welcome you again to this marvelous virtual session on the frontier of research on metrics, trying to build a better world. This workshop could never take place without the Transformative Innovation Policy Consortium initiative and the emergence of the Latin American Hub to Transform Innovation Practices. The visions of Johan Schott, Salim Chalela, and Matias Ramirez have been crucial to make this real. Well, now, sorry, I have a little cold. Entering in our matter, this workshop began 1 year ago. The Latin American Hub was in its birth. Colombia was in a restructuring moment of its system of science, technology, and innovation. The Congress had approved a transformation on the architecture of science and technology offices, trying to find a more robust political decision-making system. They create the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation. The innovation models debates were crucial to define policies in this transition: innovation for economic growth, social innovation, inclusive innovation, and transformative innovation. Those discussions were not only an imperative to determine the destiny of these new bureaucratic tools, they were a reflex of international controversies spreading all around our political and academic debates. The intense lobbying of TIPSI, our politicians, international networks, and academics linked with SPRU at the University of Sussex bring these new ideas on transitions and transformations facing sustainability and changing the conception of innovation just oriented to economic growth. These ideas had their fertilized land on all the efforts made by local academics and activists working on different angles of innovations related to grassroots, inclusion, and participation. Finally, the government included ideas on transitions to a sustainable world in the new policies. A new hope begins to open a new scenario. Nevertheless, it is an experimental scenario. This scenario could be considered one of the last bastions to save the possibilities of a rational European ancient model as a balance and prosperity model for humanity in search of a better life and a better world. Science, politics, and wars have spread worldwide this kind of thinking, and now is our global way of life. In Latin America, we have controversies inside and outside of this scenario. From the outside, many perspectives on new epistemologies have emerged. Different points of view have proposed a radical change: traditional knowledge, indigenous cosmologies, Buddhist thinking, summa causae. This is a kind of thinking in Latin America for a good living or a good way of living, Zen, Mother Earth, not far away from a Gaia vision, etc. Nevertheless, they are still incommensurable with decision makers' paradigms in each country from each corner of the entire world. Inside the scenario of the paradigm of Northwestern rationalities, we have a decision-making class with a sword of Damocles hanging above his head, a massive extinction announced, and an economy at the border of the abyss. Inside the controversy, the solution is to experiment new ways of living and development, and our responsibility is to measure the success of these experiments. Here, just here, it is where we begin to think about the necessary idea of this workshop. For some years, we have researchers doing the job, trying to adjust metrics and evaluation models to demonstrate the fruitful efforts on some transformative models. Other researchers are working in responsible models to measure the impact of science as latency, TWS, in Europe, or collab here in Latin America, to mention a few examples. I'm very grateful because 1 year ago, we think that this workshop will be only a reunion of a few friends trying to discuss a bunch of few theses that we were addressing. Today, we have 74 different researchers participating besides our graded audience on YouTube, more than 50 research advances presented for admission at this workshop, and finally 26 excellent works selected to discuss from different methodological point of views. We think that this could be one of the first agendas on metrics for transformations and transitions. We pretend to work so hard after this work to compile all your results and build this first agenda. Of course, you can publish your full papers on your periodic journal after this event, but we will ask for your permission to include these first ideas of yours. We also like to invite you, all of you, to participate on writing this agenda. Please write us, it's very important for us. Next year, we are organizing the first métricas Congress in Latin America. This Congress congregates 2 different traditional collectives in our region, all scientometrists, sorry, it's very difficult for me, this word, scientometrists and altmetrists of the region. Our idea is to launch this agenda there, and this is an issue that we have been discussing with Matthias, Sanin, and Johan. We like to call this initiative the scenarios of transformative metrics, or metrics for transformation and transitions to a sustainable world. Of course, we are open to hearing about your suggestions in this way. If you cannot express enough these days due to the short time we have between conference and conference, you can email us and we will be delighted to hear from you. Again, welcome, and we hope you enjoyed these 2 days. Well, Oscar, it's all yours, the microphone.
Hey, thank you very much, Gabriel. Very nice introduction. It's very inspiring for me, like being Colombian and being now here in Europe and seeing like so many friends. I know there is many people from different countries. So we have people not just for Latin America, as well people in England, here in the Netherlands, some people from New Zealand. We have, I don't know all the countries. If you want to write in the chat, it could be like very nice to know like the different places that people are from here in this workshop. Now what I'm going to try to do is just to introduce very briefly the dynamic and the agenda of today. So first, we have like this welcome. We are very happy to have all of you here. So thank you very much, Gabriel, again for your words. Then what we have as a section is that we call conversation. We then want to make a workshop like a very traditional workshop when we have like presentations and the participants, they have like a kind of passive role. So that we want is that all of you can debate, can conservate with each other. So the first section is focusing 3 key speakers. Gabriel is going to introduce them later. Is Johan Holt, Ismael Raffles, and Matthias. So the dynamic here is Gabriel is going to try to make some open questions to them. And then all of the participants are welcome to make as well their questions and try to open a discussion about metrics in sustainability transitions. Then we make like 4 different break sections. So first we want like a kind of introduction, because we know that it's impossible basically to be in the 4 sections at the same time. But sometimes, you know, it's very difficult to decide if you want to go to one section or to the other section. So we first have like 5 minutes when the commentators will introduce briefly these tables, and you can have like some idea what is going on in that table. Then we have like the section. So we are going to have around 1 hour to discuss, to present. It's a specific dynamic. So in every table first, every speaker will have like around 10 minutes to present their contribution. Then a commentator will make some comments and questions, and then the idea is that all participants can make their own questions. After that, the idea is to come back to the plenary section where we are all together again to discuss. We need to see in the coffee break, that is like between the commentator's presentation and the parallel sections, how we are going to organize the different breaking sections. So what we did is to ask to all of you which kind of breaking section you want to enjoy. But maybe we will struggle a little bit with some technicalities. So I really ask for you to have patience about that. It's the first time that we are doing that. And that's it. Gabriel, the slide that is like with the rules behind of this one, behind. Yeah, so next one. That one. So in the section, we don't have like this kind of rule that you cannot open your microphone, that all is like centralized in a person who gives the word. So all of you can raise your hand, can open your hand, sorry, can open your microphone, but the idea is to have like some rules that we can work all together in a very nice way. So if you have a question, the first thing is to raise your hand. Maybe you can write a comment if you want in the chat. You have the possibility to write a message to all of the participants or to a specific person if you want to maybe underline something or to start a conversation, a topic that is interesting for you. And then the idea is that you really can participate. Don't feel worried. As you see, my English is not the best, but I try to do my best and to put the face here to make all of you to participate. So don't feel worried about that. Try just to enjoy the section, to make your questions. If you have any question or any problem, technicalities, you have like my email and Gabriel emails. So you just can write an email. I'm gonna be paying attention to try to resolve if you have like any trouble. Next slide, Gabriel. And that's it. Now we can start like with the conversation. So Gabriel, again, the floor is yours to start this first section. And thank you very much again, all of you, to be here. Your microphone, Gabriel, sorry.
Thank you, Oscar. Hello again. I just want to know if Matthias, Johan, and Ismael, they are here. Please open your microphones. Yeah.
I'm here.
Johan, thank you. Ah, nice, very nice. Well, Matthias, Ismael, thank you. Johan, thank you very, very much to accept this invitation. Well, this is brief. We are going to interview you. You have 3 questions. The dynamic is very simple. I'm going to make you a question and you have 5 minutes to answer. Then I will make a question again and the next 5 minutes. If we have some times, we can recover some questions around the audience, but I think that we have a very few time here. Yes, well, the first question, we are talking about transformative metrics and considering a necessary transition to a sustainable social models. No, sorry, I have to present you. This is very unpolite. Very, I'm so sorry. Please give me a moment. I have to. I have here this. Okay. Now, here it is. Well, this is very, very important. Well, Johann Schott is a Deutsch historian working in the field of science and technology policy, a historian of technology and an expert in sustainability transitions. Johann Schott is professor of global comparative history at the Center for Global Challenges, Utrecht University. He is the academic director of the Transformative Innovation Policy Consortium and former director of the Science Policy Research Unit at the University of Sussex. Without Johan, this event has been impossible. Thank you very much, Johan, for being here. And Ismael Raffles is a senior researcher at the Center for Science and Technology Studies, CWTS, an associate faculty at SPRU, Science Policy Research Unit at the University of Sussex. He is a member of the Science, Technology and Innovation Studies Group. He works on science policy, developing novel approaches to science and technology indicators, using mixed methods for informing evaluation, foresight, and research strategies. His current focus is on research priority setting for social challenges such as bird flu or obesity or sustainable development goals, particularly in health and agriculture. And Ismael is working with us in métricas the next year. And thank you very much, Ismael, for being here with us. And Matías Ramirez is a senior lecturer at the Science Policy Research Unit at the University of Sussex Business School, where TIPSI was founded. He coordinates the work of TIPSI in Latin America. This includes the partnership with MinCiencias, the Ministry of Science and Technology here in Colombia, and the writing of the Green Book policy document in Colombia in 2018, and the work of mapping the Sustainable Development Goals of the National Research System of Mexico. He also coordinates the Latin America hub of TIPSI, founded in April 2020, involving organizations from Colombia, Chile, and Mexico. Well, again, Johan, Ismael, and Matías, thank you very much for being here. Well, now the questions. My first question is, considering a necessary transition to sustainable social models, what do you consider as the main challenges of evaluation and metrical models at this moment? I want to begin I propose that Ismael begins with this question. He's a very specialist in methodologies, and I want to begin you, Ismael. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Gabriel and organizers for inviting me to participate in this workshop. An honor being here, and really a shame not to be able to meet you all. And also hello to all the colleagues I will not be able to meet personally after a long time. So the first question. So considering necessary transition to sustainable social models, what do we consider as the main challenges of evaluation and metrical models? I suppose I will start by stating the obvious, which is that the main challenge in evaluation is, and in the use of metrics in evaluation, is that much of research evaluation, and maybe we'll have to distinguish here between research and innovation. I'm going to talk on the research side. So the main challenge for me is that most of research evaluation is still dominated by notions of excellence and quality, which are posed in an abstract way, which is actually which allows each discipline to define quality or excellence on its own way. And this tends to be understandings which are quite narrow and academic. And in this sense, if research is to contribute to the transition to sustainable models, and it's not clear if research is actually going to contribute, or instead it's going to be a break against this transition, I think we should move away from these notions of excellence, the traditional notions of excellence, and move to completely different understandings of what are the properties assessed. So instead of assessing excellence, we should be assessing whether research is contributing to certain types of topics that would facilitate certain types of transitions. Now, in order to, so I'm thinking in metrics, which is the little area of my expertise, is that if we are going to move towards metrics of research direction, then we are not anymore in metrics which are unidimensional. We are in what my colleague Andy Sterling at Sussex calls in a vector space. And therefore, metrics need to be multidimensional. Now, people will have different preferences about directions, and therefore, we cannot have just more or less indicators, but we first need to agree on the potential directions. So the proposal that in terms of traditional metrics, how would bibliometrics should move forward, is to do the following step. Since we are going to discuss directions, but we don't know which direction and when I say directions, I mean directions in research trajectories. And we don't know which of the trajectories is the preferred. I propose the following move. We ditch indicators, we don't use indicators, we go instead first to mapping, then we have a social process which will be carried out through engagement in ways which are still unknown. And in this social process, we are going to decide which of the directions in the maps are the preferred directions. It might be more than one. And then it is in this moment in which we go from mapping to indicating. So,
Ismael,
yes.
Sorry, I want to know if Johan is agree with what you are talking about. I think that it's a very, very interesting controversy. You are talking about maybe the research methods are important or not for transitions. Sorry, Ismael, you want to finish?
Yes, so just to finish, I just posted this idea of moving, from indicators to mappings and from mappings to indicating, which was actually put forward by Norcha Mares in a special issue in quantitative science studies.
Okay, thank you very much, Ismael. Johan, what do you think?
Yes, I agree. Hi, Ismael, and hi, everyone. I'm very glad to be here. Yes, I agree with a lot that has been said. I think it's clear that our current metrics are not fit for purpose. It's clear that we need to move away from indexes and so on, and we need to move to mapping tools. It's also clear that we, I think, need to bridge the divide between qualitative and quantitative research in metrics. So I'm in favor of a mixed method approach that would allow also more in-depth qualitative insights. So in that sense, I think that is the right direction. The question for me is, how do we embed the metrics in a decision-making process? Because one thing is to have the right type of metrics. Well, we are far away from that. The other is how to embed it in decision-making process. Another crucial question is about standards, because I think the international community has been trying to develop kind of universal standards. And I think we need open standards that can be locally appropriated in very different ways. So we really need to think about how we develop standards, in a new type of standards in metrics.
Okay, Johan, thank you very much. And Matthias, what do you think? You think you agree? And if you agree, what kind of standards, for example, we need, or you can write this.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Matthias, I can hear you.
Yes, we
Apparently,
do.
Gabriel is having some issues with his internet, so I'm gonna try to help him.
Okay, Gabriel, we can hear you again.
Okay, sorry. No, Matthias, what do you think about the statements of Johan and Ismael? I think that you are very familiar with these issues, and not only familiar, you agree with that, but how you can guide these challenges that we have with metrics and measures for transitions.
Okay, well, thank you, Gabriel. Thank you, Oscar, and Elena. You know, it's a wonderful opportunity to discuss this, and hello everyone. Lots of friends that I recognize, and I suppose I want to take up you know, the last point that Johan was talking about. This is what I thought about when you asked your question. It's this universality issue, because I think a lot of us agree about the critiques of the existing systems. But in the work that we've been doing, both in TIPSI and in the Latin America Hub, which involves a lot of evaluation and thinking about indicators and mappings and things like that, there is an issue which is emerging, which I don't know the solution yet, but we need to talk about, which is, I think that transition studies has a tension, and it's not a negative tension. It's one that in a way is good, because it shows that it's growing, which is, on the one hand, it has a meta narrative, to be a new frame, to be a new way, to be a new alternative to thinking about innovation, and so in other words, it wants to work at a quite a high level and a quite a high scale, and that pushes for a degree of universality, which is what Johan was just saying now about these standards. But at the same time, it wants to be flexible and bottom up, and allow people to adopt this in different ways. And it has a tension similarly between scaling up the transitions, which has a logic when you try to scale up, but at the same time implement things in a very context sensitive way. And it's a sort of, I suppose, a tension between, in terms of methods, that leads to a tension as well, because it's the tension between a sort of universalist idea and a more ethnographic method, and they're quite different. And the more you scale up, the more you become bigger, and the people address this, the more there is a pressure to be able to have easily measurable metrics, things that you can compare and so on. So how do we sort of, as transitions grows, how do we deal with this tension? How do we you know, get the positive aspects of the scale up, but not, and avoid some of the pitfalls that other meta narratives have happened? So I think, I mean, the way that we've tried to think about this, and we've begin to think about this, is to maybe have some sort of categories in which you know what you're doing in a different way. So on the one hand, you allow actors to represent their spaces in different ways. On the one hand, you allow for unique responses, which, you know, sort of place-based tradition, which has to happen, which come from where you don't expect it. On the other hand, you allow actors to respond to choices that are given to them. In other words, they make choices, political choices, and that can be a set of choices that they make. But you also allow, on the other hand, actors to work on a linear scale, more, you know, higher or lower or something like that, because that may be the situation in which you're in. So, but I suppose you have to just know which, you know, what it is that you're trying to, what category you're in, so that you don't confuse the different issues, and then allow maybe different metrics and things to emerge. Because I mean, I agree with completely with Ismail's approach, but sometimes when you work with these policymakers, going there in one go is going to be very difficult. So I think we should just be aware in which category we're in, and and work with people to make it easier for that to happen. So I think this is a tension which is going to emerge. It's always going to be there, and we need to talk about that more.
Okay, thank you, Matthias. I understand. I don't know, maybe at the bottom of your concerns, it's the traditional discussion between micro and macro, the duality of structure. You have to find the equilibrium between the macro structure and all these activities in the micro world, I think. But we are confronted here, I think, not only with abstract models. For example, we talk about free scale networks. These free scale networks are not anymore an abstract model. They operate in at the web. We have the Facebook problem, the Twitter problem, that all the people are working not following a decision-making structure with a person or a group that is trying to make some decisions or the better rational decision in front of a massive audience or a different citizens that are working together in small groups or very big groups. This issue, I think, is very important to try to understand the next question. The next question is about, it is clear for us, the researchers, the importance of metric models for policymakers. Still, it is not clear that all policymakers are decision makers based their decisions on scientific evidence. We can figure out many examples warning about climate change, failure to meet shared purposes across the world. In this context, how can we make more potent the plate of evaluation models in decision-making processes, considering these kind of problems, the micro-macro structure and the decision-making processes inside these structures, I think. What do you think, Johan, about this?
Well, there's of course, classical issue about the relationship between expertise or evidence and policy making. Or politics, and this has to do with the way you frame that relationship. If you frame it like the scientist will come up with answers, and then the policymakers need to make decisions. So the scientist, explores it, provides evidence, and hopefully they will also talk about the consequences. And then it's up for the politics to decide, or whether you acknowledge that inside the metrics there is politics going on. So I would say we need to integrate the metrics work more into the decision making. So at my university, University of Utrecht, we will now set up a new project to look at the university research through the SDG, lens. But the aim is explicitly not to evaluate. The aim is to navigate together with the research community. Okay, which directions do we want to go? And how can we develop a reflexive mirror, that tells us what is happening right now, like Ismail was saying. So we try to map the directions in the system and then try to engage in a conversation. So that's part of the answer. So it is an input in a decision-making process, and we need to structure that process and not assume that the scientist will have the answer.
Johan, thank you. I want to point that, yes, it's very important, the decision-making processes where the rationality, it's very important to try to make this, the evidence is important, but this is competing with the social networks, the Facebook, the Twitter that I told you before. And I think that those are not a kind of decisions, a rational kind of decisions. In yes. Those decisions are the Facebook and Twitter. How can we deal with this, confronting these challenges that transitions made us? Ismael, for example, or Johan, I don't know if you want to say something more.
Well, it's a big question, but transformations or transitions are very complex long-term processes. There are many influences. So here we talk about the role of metrics and how we should use the metrics. So I think we need the type of metrics we develop should be conducive to the type of decision-making process. And we need to think about the embedding in the decision-making process. Of course, there will be many other influences on transformations, but metrics cannot solve everything.
Okay, thank you. Matthias, what do you think?
Well, just looking at your, I suppose at your question, I mean, I suppose there's two types of problems. One is, you know, one group of policymakers that, you know, makes up stories, lies, distorts, fake news, everything else, and, you know, so you need to fact check and whatever. But then you've got another, which is a more subtle problem. So your question sort of, the way the question is posed, and I don't know if you did this deliberately or not, it's sort of, there's a suggestion that scientific evidence is kind of pure. I don't know whether you meant that, sort of has, you know, provides clear messages. And, you know, it's I mean, here in the UK, you know, you've got this, over COVID, you've got this group of experts, which is called SAGE. And then, you know, not only do they disagree between themselves on each issue, but you've got an alternative SAGE, which is another group of scientists and experts that disagrees often with the SAGE itself. So we've gone way beyond here anyway, the idea that there is one view. The government changes its minds every 2 or 3 weeks, and it always says it's based on scientific opinion, but there are different sciences. So my you know, the only thing I would say there is that, you know, the scientists, Johan said, the traditional view, you know, the way they pose the problem, the way they frame the problem is important as well. It's not pure, it's not neutral. So, and then issues such as risk taken and so on, these are all value laden issues. So, you know, I would go back to that, you know, the stuff that sort of STS is very good at, and people like David Hess, when they talk about undone science, you know, and, you know, we did that work with Oscar in Colombia, where we found that, you know, what science funding was listening to was these social movements. I mean, you know, that's not neutral. That's listening to a group of society that happens to get mobilized. So there isn't anything neutral about this, really. I think it's about us. Well, you know, it's about politics, and it's about getting groups that are not heard of shouting and organizing sufficiently strongly so that they get taken into account as well, so that the groups that are unheard get heard. I can't say much more than that at the point. It's not an expertise of mine, but that's my gut reaction.
Okay, Matthias, thank you very much. And Ismael, what do you think? Matthias talk about a new actor, the social movements, for these kind of issues. What do you think?
Yeah,
Ismael?
I agree very much with Johan's point about the key issue being how the metrics, how the indicators are embedded in the policy process. and which is about the type of things that Matthias was talking about, the framing and who gets to participate in the policy process. And in this respect, I think I have found it helpful to think the way that people have thought before of how scientific advice gets used in policy. So think about our indicators as a piece of science that might be used in policy, but it is influenced by policy, the same way that there's been all these discussions about COVID. And for these, I think the very, very useful references are Roger Pilke, the honest broker, and all the post-normal science work. So for example, I see here that we have Siddharth Sarin from Bergen among the participants, and Siddharth is part of the group that's working on post-normal science. And I think it's useful to think of our indicators, innovation indicators, research indicators in the framework of post-normal science, in terms of how they get embedded in the policy process. Now, how we do this, I don't think there is just one way, and we are experimenting. But it's definitely a question of, rather than what the previous model was, we produced indicators and we send them to policy. Now that it has to be about producing mappings that get discussed and that get reopened, that get questioned, and then to produce together with a variety of stakeholders the indicating or the indications that can be used in a policy process.
Well, you always emerge the issue of the difference between epistemic communities, not only epistemic communities. You have people non-educated, for example, or people that have differences in their languages, trying to solve some things. I think that is a very, very wide field of research for our future. My last question, I think that we will have some minutes to open the mics to the audience. But my last question, I think this is the question most difficult, I think. I don't know, what do you think? Rankings, cytometrical models between other evaluation models not only describe the performance of different actors relative to the solution of the problem or the achievement of some goals. Those models can influence policies and organizational decisions. For example, in Latin America, international rankings affect important decisions about the direction of the S&T system, lowering the self-determination of different countries about your own destinies. My question is about self-determination and metric models. Following the models of international rankings to determine what decisions could be made or not in countries with less power, can these metric models on transformations and transitions follow the models of international rankings to try to coordinate global transitions? Or is it more important to make a change in these global logics that undermine the self-determination of different countries located at the periphery of the World Bank and IDB between other global organizations? This question is about this kind of issue that I'm talking about, the difference between epistemic communities and the power of the rankings. I think that you are pointing some issues about the mapping, not rankings, but it's not only the mapping. You can do the mapping from an international organization, or you can do the mapping from a communitarian or a social collective movement. Or maybe you can do the mapping through networks, through social networks. That is not micro macro, that's a free scale network that is trying to do a mapping and the people disappear there. What do you think about it? I know that that is a very complex question, but I want to know your opinion about it. I don't know, is Matthias, please tell us, what do you think?
It is a difficult question for me anyway. And, you know, I don't have a, I mean, I took the question to be rather than about mappings or rankings, I took it to be more about whether you rely on international driven metrics or national, or you develop metrics which respond to national priorities and national problems and flow from the national priorities. That's the way I took the question to be. And it's not easy because you have some problems which are, I mean, they are internationally linked problems, and you cannot address them just through national approaches. So you know, if you just develop a national ranking, you don't really understand. I mean, the whole thing with you know, with sort of sustainability, with the way some countries, you know, they let's say they develop this SDG index, you know, so you get the northern countries do really well, especially Scandinavia, yeah. But of course, those countries, why? Is because they're offloading all their environmental sort of responsibilities onto the south. So Sweden is one of the highest, doesn't do any fishing, but it eats fish because it's importing it, so it's offloading. So you need international, you need indicators that pick this up internationally, of international trade, and you see the way countries offload that responsibility and you pick that up. And also, I think from a practical point of view, there are a sort of landscape using MLP language agendas, which are good, which countries should be forced to look at. Gender, you know, can be one of them, you know. So that, you know, but on the other hand, there are obviously clearly indicators and issues which are particular, you know, like one of the projects in the hub that we have is on the issue of urban violence and how urban violence is used, this is in Colombia, as a narrative. I mean, that is a very South and Central American issue, because urban violence is such a dominant narrative and it impedes the ability to, it makes, you know, it's very relevant for people working on transition because it stops collective action and so on. And so these are priorities, and you have to develop indicators to respond to that. So, you know, you have to probably combine both. But the central point is, whichever system you use, the researchers who are driving this have to have a genuine interest that these indicators are driving, you know, change forward. Because you can have, no matter how progressive your indicator, take the SDG, you end up with something like an SDG index, which completely misrepresents, you know, what countries are doing. I mean, you know, you've got all the Western countries at the top because they can provide a high living standard, but yet their ecological effects through high consumption, you know, Finland is one of the highest producers of CO2, it's a disaster, and is highest on the SDG index. I mean, that cannot be. And the reason is because they have a high living standard. So if you don't have the people who are doing these things sensitively looking at this, you know, critiquing these indicators, it doesn't matter whether you're international or national, frankly. You know, the spirit has to be the right one there to look for indicators that actually promote and help you to undertake transformation, and not just be something, you know, to be used to, you know, as a beauty contest.
Thank you, Matthias. Johan, TIPS is working on strategies of top-down and bottom-up in different countries. What kind of relationship this has with metrics? I think that is very near to this question, and maybe you have explored some answers to that in your daily activities. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think the metrics can be global because the map can be global. and there's many relationships across the globe. And one of the problems is exactly that you know, the map consists of nation states, as if, you know, that's the unit of analysis, because the UN and many international organizations are organized according to nation states. So nation states ask themselves how they contribute to the SDGs. Then they do a scoring, which is often a very bureaucratic process and a ticking the box exercise. And then you look good or you look bad. Well, that's not very helpful. So the first step, I don't think it's a problem to have a mapping, a global mapping, but you can also, on a global map, locate yourself, you know, in relation to many other things. The question is more on which level do you make decisions subsequently, and who's involved in the decision making. So who has a say? And that can be organized on many levels. So I think science, metrics can produce tools, you know, navigating and mapping tools. Like in TIPSY, we have some models for how we think. And these are navigating tools, navigating models. But for concrete action, yes, you need bottom-up processes to decide on actual direction and how to move forward. But still, you know, if you're in a locality, it's nice to have a mapping, a compass. So, okay. And science can provide the compass, as long as it doesn't try to create these kind of, you know, indexes. It tries to understand, you know, it can create a map.
Okay, thank you, Johan. But I wondering about who do those maps. It's very important to try to put this question at the session. It's very important, yes, because not only it's very difficult to make some dialogues, global dialogues about metrics. You make some dialogues about policies, but metrics is always an issue that you reserve to scientometricians or researchers or scientists. Ismael, what do you think about it?
I like very much Johan's point about having tools to navigate global maps, which, but you know, these tools actually, when you zoom in, because they are multidimensional, the spaces change. So locally, you might see different. But if you look at from far, sufficiently far away, you may do comparisons, which can be useful for as a compass. But the decision being taken place at the local level, because let's face it, the dynamics is that the scientific centers and the policies from the north will have a lot of influence through hegemonic discourses. So being careful that the decisions are kept at the local level is important to compensate for this current hegemony. I don't know if in 50 years' time this will still be the case, but currently I see the problem in homogenization. You know, that some region in the Mediterranean trying to do the same that the Swedish do, because they have higher reputation. So I think these global navigating tools and local decision making seems to me like a short way of explaining a potential way to move forward. I like it. Yeah, for once, Johan, we seem to be really in agreement.
Well, I'm very happy for that. That's good. Well, we have 3 more minutes. I don't know, maybe a question from the audience. If one, okay. Luis Fitzgerald says that I'm interested to hear more, please, about how we can measure in a way that is transformative. So counting things not normally counted, prioritized in a way that has a change of being seen by and acted upon by policymakers. Maybe this mapping you are discussing has some potential here. So if you could share more on that, it will be really appreciated. Thank you, says Luis, who wants to answer
I'd like
this
to
question.
invite Luis, indeed, Gabriel. I think that we need to encourage the participants to speak. Maybe next time.
Okay.
Maybe next time.
Okay. You're right, Oscar. Sorry, Luis.
Well, thanks for this question. It's not, if there's only 3 minutes, it's not easy to answer. But let me say, this is the main challenge. So it's bang on the target for me, because a lot of our metrics are, of course, input and output. And we need to have process metrics. So to develop this is hopefully the task, partly, and to discuss this of this workshop. I can talk about the type of method we are trying to develop within TIPSI, with Matthias and Oscar and others, but there are several attempts right now. And I think for the moment we should have a conversation about them and we should explore them. So there's not one method.
Okay, I think that we don't have only just 30
Claudia
seconds.
has another question. I think that we can take 5 minutes more, Gabriel, because it's not a lot of time for questions, and I try to make my part very fast so we can use that time
Oscar.
to people to make questions. So Claudia,
please, if you want to talk about your question.
Your microphone, Claudia.
Do I need to talk? I was trying to tweet, but anyways, yeah. Well, I'm thinking about funding, and because funding is power and also influences the direction of research agendas, then I would like to ask you, Johan, Matthias, and Ismail, about where do you see there is room for change? Is it in funding first or in policy? And who do you think are the actors who will be the ones in charge of triggering this process of change?
Thanks, Claudia.
Well, who should go first? I mean, who you want to answer, Claudia, first? Because it's difficult for us to decide, perhaps.
No, it's up to you.
I recommend Ismail.
Okay.
And it's up to you, Johan. But if you want,
no, Ismail, go ahead.
Okay, Ismail.
So, yeah, I see change as very difficult, but in terms of funding, a way to start would be by pluralizing the committees that are making the funding decisions, including some social actors that might consider issues about transformation in the peer review process of the projects. That's a way that's been tried out, for example, in health, and that could be also extended to a variety of research areas. But I don't expect a sudden change. I think this will be really a process.
I mean, I think that my experience has been that sometimes policy change can be quite traumatic for some of these people. But you can have a funding system which is open. It reacts to demand. So you can actually have funding for quite interesting projects, as we've seen, because it responds sometimes to a demand, but the policy is not necessarily sort of properly formulated. So that allows a bottom-up process of interesting projects that are transformative. And the policy, the official policy, centralized policy, is way behind. But you can have, projects which are interesting, which are doing things, and make, it's like this. Some people in institutions, talk about sort of layering systems, where you've got, as Ismail said a little bit, it's not one go where suddenly all policy changes. You've got groups within, but the funding can be quite flexible, can be quite open to respond to the demands. And so I think that's, you don't need for all policy to change, basically, to start working on that transformation. As we see now, I think there's a massive disjunct, isn't there, between what researchers are doing on the ground and the official policy. There's a massive difference between the two, and the policy is way behind.
Well, I think that we don't have much time. Matthias, Ismael, Johan, thank you very much for this interesting dialogue. I think that we have many questions from here, and well, we have to go on with the program. Matthias, Ismael, Johan, thank you.
Thank you for organizing.
Thank you.
Okay.
Gabriel,
Oscar,
can you share the slides, please?
Yes,
So
yes.
just to inform, like in the next section that we are gonna do is first to introduce the commentators. So the commentators read the papers that many of the speakers did. And they are gonna first like briefly introduce what is about this table and give like some point of view. And maybe you can change your mind about the table that you want to join. It's not very good in terms of the technical issue to move people, but like the intention is to encourage you to know about the others' work, because it's many tables, so it's not that easy to make it simple. Gabriel, can you share the slide with the commentators, please? Yeah, so in the first section, we have Luciano Gallón. He is professor at the Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana in Medellín, Antioquia. As Gabriel is in Antioquia, but Gabriel is in the University of Antioquia. So for people who don't know Antioquia. And then I really want to say thank you to Christian Matti. I didn't say to him with a lot of time to participate as a commentator, and he was like very nice to help us with reading the papers and making comments. Christian Matti is a researcher, but as well is a policy maker, and he is currently driving basically many projects related to data, to methods in climate kick. Then we have a Carmen Bueno from Mexico. She is at the Universidad Iberoamericana. She was, like you can see here, the connections, and a person that really liked connections. So she was a professor of Gabriel in some point of his life. And it's very nice to have you here to help us to come and take this section. And finally, we have a Maria Lucia, I don't know how to pronounce the last name. Gabriel, can you help me?
Eschenhagen.
Eschenhagen. I'm very happy to have her here because she's like kind of from the same school. I'm from environmental studies. So it's very nice to have you here to commentate the section that is more focused on sustainability and environmental issues. She's at the University Pontificia Bolivariana as well. So as you see, we have like many participants that they are working or they are like located in the global north. And we have like many commentators in Latin America. So the idea is also to try to incentivize that conversation. So I'd like to start first with Luciano. Luciano, you can introduce your section, please. I don't know, Gabriel, if you can share the slide where is like the participants in that table. And Luciano, please. I don't know if you want to share slides as well, Luciano. If you want to do that, it's good as well. It's not mandatory to use these slides.
Okay.
Are you there, Luciano?
Hello to everyone. Thank you, Oscar. Thank you, Gabriel. And hello to our friends around the world. Okay, I will be commentating the first session, measuring transitions. We will have Claudia, Alexandra, Peter Watt, and Mark. And they will be sharing those three works that they are working on. Claudia will be talking about social movements versus sectors. And this is quite interesting, how social movements conflict with sectors, with interest sectors in their territories. And then we have from here we will have a function, a value function of what she calls regional diversification, and how that diversification is a function of industrial base and capabilities. But the interesting and key point will be social movements. And the question that I give you to invite to our session is, do social movements plays a role in overcoming constraint, and how the new paths are envisaged? So Claudia is trying to answer new paths via social movements versus sectors. Then we will have Alexandra that will be proposing new evaluation index. She has found that there is no standardized framework to evaluation of transit in Latin America, particularly in Latin America. And she introduced maybe a new concept that is that she calls paratransit, the way that transportation goes as an informal public transportation. And that occurs in some parts of the world, but particularly most in Latin America cities. And then we also have a very important issue that is gender violence, violence in public transportation, and how those two new concepts could be integrated in the transit systems evaluation index. So the question is, one of the questions is, what is a sustainable framework that takes into account all the dimensions of transit in Latin America? And the third, the final, will be the Pirouat and Mark work. And they introduce two very interesting domains related to energy consumption. The first one is passenger mobility, transportation of passengers in a city. And the second one is electricity. But the particular interesting point here is how electricity and passenger mobility relates. Electricity in a way of the house-generated, self-generated energy to do the transportation in the city. So they will be showing us a new urban sustainability assessment framework. They call it USAF. And they will be trying to answer the question, to what extent is urban passenger mobility and electricity becoming more environmentally and social sustainable? So those are my three interesting works, and we will give you more details after the presentations. That's it, Oscar.
Thank you very much, Luciano, Claudia, Alexandra, and Pirouat. Sorry, my pronunciation. Can we move to the next slide? Christian, if you can help us. I think that you said before that you wanted to show like some slides. So please, if you want to just do it.
I think I'm going to use the slides then in the session, and I will try to make this quick. So the people can decide soon where they want to move. So I'm just going to review the three ones in terms of the overall discussion that we are going to have. So the three presentations are very attractive in terms of opening discussions regarding new indicator frameworks in terms of understanding transformation. So in the case of the first presentation, I think there is a kind of an attractive debate about understanding the logic of experiment, like the sustainable transition experiments, and understanding the evaluation from confronting point of views, like the developmental evaluation and the evaluation for accountability. That is the type of discussion that we had before about policy and funding, and trying to have matrix that goes beyond actually the typical stock to measure impact in terms of static elements. It's very interesting also in terms of the understanding of the multi-level perspective that we need to introduce in terms of the frameworks to understand transformation. The second presentation on a new framework for accessing the potential of innovative activities is kind of connected to the work that we are doing with Climate Kick, and is bringing this debate about what kind of new transformative indicators type of frameworks we can bring by pushing forward the discussion regarding a more process-oriented type of indicators, as Johan was mentioning, and not the kind of the statics type of indicators. And last but not least, the last presentation on tipping point is bringing this particular concept of tipping points to visualize the overall transformative process in terms of this concept that can be used as a kind of an element to identify different type of logic and the dynamic of transitions in different moments. I think it's very interesting in terms of the discussion of combining impact, context, and the logic of interventions.
Thank you very much, Christian. Carmen, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hello.
Okay, can you introduce your ranking section, please?
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here and learn a lot about these metrics. In fact, the third group has to do, or it's supposed to do, with niche case studies, but they presented very different metrics, so it will be a very interesting discussion. The first one, the analyzing energy systems integration, a socio-technical approach and a system architecture methodology, presented by Ali, Sari, Charalampos, and Sayed. Well, this paper is centered on the energy systems integration, considering electricity, gas, heat, and mobility. It is suggested in this paper that coupling these four energy systems and the regimes and integrating them on a mega system can result on a cost-effective and flexible transition pathway. This argument is that the energy systems have been analyzed separately when they should be conceptualized as a system of systems. Very ambitious project, this one, because of their multiple technological convergences. Their purpose is to explore multi-systems interaction and implement a socio-technical transition analysis. They present a methodological framework of system architecture methodology from engineering that can help them analyze and model functional and structural linkages intra and inter systems, as well as interaction patterns and emerging interfaces. The second paper is titled Measuring Government Challenges on Sustainable Regional Development. This was written by Oscar Alejandro Leonardo from Universidad Externada de Colombia. They want to analyze the complexities of territorial transitions towards sustainability in Colombia, considering four development dimensions: economic, political, environmental, and spatial. Their aim is to construct a typology illustrating different features of the governance conditions and challenges of a territory. These four dimensions mentioned before will be analyzed considering two categories: integration, that describes the degree and quality of relations between the actors or activities in the territory, and convergence, analyzing the quality of alignment between conceptions of livelihood, the socioeconomic and political situations, or visions of sustainable territorial development. The third paper was written by Jorge Ortiz Moreno from the Development Studies program of Sussex University. And well, you see his title is Socio-Technical Reconfigurations Where Infrastructure Networks Have Failed, the Case of Rainwater Harvesting in Mexico City. this case, I know it very well, so it was very interesting to see it and analyze it. He centers his analysis at the niche level of the socio-technical system and its relation with the landscape and prevailing regimes that provide, in a highly selective way, a basic and mandatory infrastructure to supply water to one of the largest metropolitan areas of the world. As a supplemental infrastructure, this is the one that Jorge studies, for water supply, rainwater harvesting facilities have evolved at the niche level, receiving support from diverse stakeholders. Likewise, this paper seeks to place potential transition metrics where both sustainability and social justice objectives are addressed. So I'm anxious to discuss these three papers. Thank you.
Carmen, thank you very much. Now we can go to the last breaking section. Maria Luisa, please. That's my favorite breaking section, to be honest.
So hello to all. So my first presentation to comment is synergies and trade-offs between SDGs, an approach based on country performance. It's written by Amir Enami, Victoria Spazer, Richard Mann, and Israel Osorio-Rodate from the University of Leeds and the World Bank. So this paper proposes a data-driven methodology that produces a network of synergies and conflicts between indicators, where each represents one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. This network reveals synergy and conflicts from the data that are stronger than would be expected from random chance, and can enable policymakers to peer into the interaction between the goals and to make decisions regarding resource allocations that best suits any given country's current level of development and income status. So the main question of them is to create a network representation of how the goals interact. The approach taken there is a data-driven one, examining countries' past performance on targets to determine which may be synergic of conflict. So this is the first one. The second one is about pattern discovery of climate and environmental policy indicators. And here, what they want to do is to see the gap between the needs of environmental policy, regulator data, and the policy of sustainable indicators and indexes that reflect the variegate impacts of policies on the economy. So the main objective is to demonstrate that research needs to incorporate new methods to revamp the environmental and climate policy indexes. This is a highly important and research area that, apart from a handful of recent studies, is not sufficiently developed. And the third one is about futuring food and realizing transformative scenarios insight from the scarcity. And this is the main questions. What is in this place is how are practices around food sharing evolving now, and how might they do so into the future? And the other question is, what are the opportunities and challenges presented by current trends in technology, policy, and social innovation? So these are the three works which I have to comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I couldn't see you. I don't know if maybe something with your connection, but we can see that later.
Excuse me.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I think, but it's just that I cannot see you. Like, where is your window?
Yes, I forgot it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I can see you. No, that's fine. That's fine. Nice to meet you.
Excuse me.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much for the introduction of the breaking section. So that we are going to do right now is the coffee break. So we are gonna use some elements from quantum theory. So we are gonna move people from this section to other breaking sections. So if you change your mind, please let us know and we try to do something about it. But it could be great if you keep your mind in the same table. It could, you know, like make life easier. But if you want to switch, that's fine. Then Christian, you are not gonna in your table. You are not gonna switch to another breaking section. You are gonna be in this that is the main section because it is the live section in YouTube. So you are not gonna get any of the people that are in that table. You are not gonna get a notification to move. And if you have any question, we can use the coffee break to try to resolve like some of the technical issues. So just turn off now your cam, your microphone, enjoy a coffee, stretch your body, and see you in the breaking section. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Hello, hi all, everyone. Well, we're back. I hope
Hello,
that
Gabriel.
you. Hi, Luciano. Well, I think that we are going to send you an invitation to every session that you are going to participate. Please wait a minute if Mauricio can confirm that. Mauricio, podemos empezar. We can begin the sessions, please.
Yes, Gabriel. Right now, we started the sessions. We redirect all the people that choose a session, and we some people is still here in the session or the group 2. So if anyone wants to be moved to one session, just let me know and I can redirect to a session that you choose. But
Thank
right
you.
now, this session transform in the session 2 or the group 2.
Okay, thank you, Mauricio. You can share your questions here at the chat, please. And if you have any doubt or something, please let us know. There is a problem, Mauricio. I am not here at the session 2, but I am still here. I don't know if this is the problem of other persons.
Which one is your session, Gabriel?
My session is with Christian. Christian is here too. And we are at, it's the, oh, no, sorry, we are the second session, Christian.
Yeah.
No, sorry, this is our session. Okay, well.
The best way to push people to go to other session if we start with this one. Okay. So
yeah, you're right. Please. Well, you're right. Well, welcome to the second session. We have here Christian Matis, our commentator, and this is the session 2. Please note that. We are in framing methodological approaches to measure transformation.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Excuse me, I have to be in the 4th session and I'm still here. I don't know how to go there.
Which
Mauricio.
one? What is your name? What is your name?
Maria Luisa Eschenhagen.
She's the commentator, Mauricio, of the 4th session.
Sorry.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Hi all. For me, it's the same thing. Confraria, I would like also to go to session 4, and I'm in 2.
Okay, sorry, Hugo. You are not from the session 2. You are for session 4.
4, yeah. I would like to go to the 4. Yeah.
Okay, please give us a minute. Mauricio, can
just 1 minute.
Okay.
Yeah, just 1 minute.
Okay, thank you.
Maria Luisa.
Someone else have the same problem, or it's okay? Okay, well.
Maria Luisa, ya Maria Luisa entró. Which one has
Hugo,
a problem?
Hugo Confraria.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Which session?
4.
4.
Okay.
I want to go to case studies, Diego.
What is your name? Excuse me?
Diego Chavarro.
Diego is 4-3. Case studies, yeah. Sorry, Stephen, Christian, Caetano, Johan.
Session 3.
Francisca.
Right?
Right.
Okay. Anyone
else? Yeah, anyone? Anyone else? Okay, well.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I would like to go to session 1.
Okay.
Mark.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Wow.
Hello, can I go to session 4, please?
Okay, to begin this, I recommend that if anyone has any problem, please put in the chat and we can begin the session. Yeah, agree. Okay, we are at session 2. This is framing methodological approaches to measure transformation. Christian Matti will comment all your presentations, and we have 3 of them. The dynamic of this session is that you have you have 10 minutes to present. We are near to the 9:40 here at Colombia, and this is I think that 3:40 GMT. Well, the first that we have, I don't want to lose your rest time to your presentation. And first presentation that we have is from Stephen Williams. He is from the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies, Simon Fraser University, and Chalmers University of Technology. Please, Stephen, if you have your PowerPoint, you can project them.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Let me just do that.
Yeah, okay.
Let me try that again.
You can do it. We see perfect the presentation.
Can you see the slides? Okay,
yeah.
Great. I'll start. And yeah, thanks very much for having me here. Yeah, I'll make the presentation very quick so we can have time for some discussion. Yeah, I also apologize for being late. I got the time zone conversion wrong. It's adding and subtracting 2 is more difficult than I thought sometimes for my own mental state. But just before we get into the recent the paper that I submitted, I just want to highlight that this is really building on a lot of work that's already gone on. I'm not going to go into details of these papers, but I'd encourage you, if you're interested in some of the things that I talk about, this kind of is previously published work that goes into a framework for evaluating transformation projects, and a couple of other papers that delve more deeply into linking environmental justice, energy justice, climate justice, and transitions work from an evaluation framework. And then the bottom one, which is still in review, is really looking at how evaluation itself can be a process to foster justice and inclusion within local sustainability projects. I'm just going to skip over the slide. So what I focused on with this paper is kind of 3 reflections that I want to sort of talk about briefly that I've sort of seen from my review of the literature, from my work doing empirical cases. I also do consulting work, doing project and program evaluation for NGOs, foundations, government agencies, corporations, all in the realm of sustainability, and really see these kind of 3 pieces emerging. So I'm going to talk about those one by one, and also suggest some ways forward that might be points of discussion, and I'd really love to hear people's feedback. I deliberately wrote this paper very much as a reflection, provocation for discussion. So it's not, because I've already published a lot of that empirical work, and I didn't want to present a huge framework in this session. So this first one, which it sounds like was already talked about in the introductory session that I missed, is this big tension between evaluation for learning and evaluation for accountability. And thinking here about transformation projects, if it was simple as saying, we're at point A, we need to go to point B, let's evaluate how we get there, then we wouldn't even need a lot of these projects. We would be finished by now. We'd have a sustainable society. But obviously it's a lot more complex with that. We're working within complex systems. We don't know exactly how to get there. We don't necessarily agree on where there is. So there's a lot of navigational learning issues. But at the same time, the funders and governments tend to focus very much around accountability. Tons of GHG reduced, number of job created, contributions to GDP, number of workshops, all those kind of things. But this way of actually evaluation as a tool for learning and navigating as a way to help people make strategic choices is very important. So the couple of ways forward, this idea of empowerment or participatory evaluation, which really centers participants in a project to co-develop an evaluation framework. There's been lots of researchers that have been working for years on the power dynamics between academic researchers and communities, and with action research and all different kinds of things. But if you think about that as applies to evaluation, can the process of actually co-developing a process of evaluation help to bring those communities together? We also mentioned, Christian mentioned this concept of developmental evaluation, which for those who are not familiar, it's really, for me, the simplest way is that traditional evaluation, really broadly, is done through a process. At the end, you say whether it was good or bad, what could have been done differently, and whether it achieved its goals. And that can be really worthwhile. But if you're trying to navigate through a sustainability process at a city or in a country level, it's not actually that helpful 3 years later for someone to give you a report that says, this is what you could have done differently. Developmental evaluation really focuses on a continual iterative engagement with the projects and feeding back learnings in real time and helping reflect back to projects what they're learning and new developments and changes, so they can actually make adjustments and change courses. And then this last one here was actually brought up during a question, I can't remember who asked it, this question about power. And this is something I think we as researchers and academics have a lot of responsibility for, to push back against funding agencies, against government agencies, to be able to say, look, there's more to evaluation than just some of these hard numbers that you want to be able to stand up and talk about. The second one, which I think is quite interesting, is this intersection of discourse and evaluation. And when you look at the research and the literature around transitions and transformations, there's actually a lot of discussion around discourses and narratives, but a lot of that tends to be focused on how to change those existing narratives, how to change discourses, how to be able to engage with broad societal conceptions and shift those. There's not as much focus on what are the actual discourses within the projects. So for example, one of my big case studies, the Energy Futures Lab in Canada, very much had a eco-modernist sustainable development discourse at its heart, that sustainability and continuing development of the energy sector in Canada, involving the oil and gas sector and sustainability transition, those ideas were completely compatible. Of course, there are many other sustainability discourses that would say the complete opposite of that. But thinking about how are those discourses actually represented in a project, and when we're evaluating something like the diversity within a project, within the Energy Futures Lab, scored very, very high on diversity of gender, background, geographic distribution, age, and so on. But all of that diversity was within this one specific discourse. So John Dryzek and Niemeyer talk about this idea of discursive representation. How are different discourses represented? And then how does that actually affect the evaluation? Because of course, evaluators and researchers, we're working within our own discourses. So Ian Fazy and colleagues have brought forward this idea of the self-reflexive scientists, really being careful to be transparent about what are our own biases, narratives, worldviews, and discourses, which is very common in some disciplines like anthropology, where it's just accepted that any researcher is bringing their own worldviews and cultures. Definitely within the traditional evaluation community, that's not necessarily as widely accepted. So thinking about how we can kind of bridge those worlds. And also thinking about when we're conducting an evaluation, and in some sense, any research, any empirical research project is evaluating or assessing something, what is the discourse? What is the narrative that evaluation is being conducted within? What is considered important? What is considered valuable? What are the relationships that are considered is very important to be transparent about. And potentially even challenging ourselves to look at what would my assessment be like through the lens of a different sustainability discourse, instead of thinking about sustainable development, maybe from a deep ecology or a political economy lens or a feminist ecology lens. What would it actually look like to assess the same project through those different lenses and discourses? And the final one I'll close with is this idea of interconnected relationships. And I bring this forward because most academic papers, and I like seeing these papers that have tables and charts and lists and bullet points, and it makes things very easy to understand. It's very clear. But when we see those tables and charts and lists, that implies that everything in there is in linear, structured relationships, that each element, each bullet point is a discrete component that exists in and of itself. It implies that there's a hierarchical relationship between levels 1, 2, and 3. And it doesn't really provide space for the emergence of patterns or clusters. And also the fact that when we're working in transformative projects and transformative processes, we're living and working within complex systems where individual elements of a system don't exist in isolation. They're connected to other elements of a system. There are relationships. Some of them are obvious, some are not so obvious. There are discontinuous relationships between those things. It's just not a straight linear 1-to-1, 1 + 1 = 2. Sometimes 1 + 1 = 15 or 20, depending on how things actually work. So thinking about ways to better capture these linkages across different levels of different evaluation frameworks. And I think one really interesting opportunity is the methodology of process tracing, which is very common in the political science world, where they try to look historically at answering questions like, why did some countries join the Gulf War coalition and not others? Why did the Soviet Union choose to invade some countries and not others? And proposing different hypotheses and using documents and interviews to be able to prove or disprove those hypotheses around causal relationships. Another, I think, thing that could be really taken forward is doing more work on cross-case comparisons. A lot of the literature around evaluation, transformation, transition tends to be very focused on case-specific publications. And those are very useful because you can really go into depth on a specific case, but then you lose some of the ability to look at how generalizable are these findings? How important is context? We all know that context is important, but which elements of context, in which environments, which elements are more important to pay attention to another? So doing more work around cross-case comparisons. And I'll just finish with this closing thought. I'm not going to go through all those bullets, but just this idea about thinking of evaluation as transformation, not just evaluating transformative projects. And I love the title of this whole workshop, Transformative Metrics, thinking about in what ways can the evaluative process itself be transformative, both in terms of fostering learning, fostering community, fostering justice, and ultimately fostering transformation. And so my one final point, if you're interested in doing more around this, I'm actually just doing a job description now for a new research assistant position in my research group of transdisciplinary theory, evaluation, and culture at the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies in Potsdam in Germany. So that posting will go live next week. So if you're looking for a way to sort of dig into some of these ideas further, please check out that link in the next week. And I'd love to talk to you more about that. And you can send me an email directly one-on-one after, I'd be happy to chat. So sorry, I went 1 minute over, but I talked as fast as I could. So thank you.
Stephen, thank you very much for your interesting presentation. Well, we have the second presentation is a review of innovation models and indicator frameworks towards a new framework for assessing transformative potential on innovative activities. Caetano Pena, he's who is the owner of the paper. He's from the Utrecht University Center for Global Challenges and the Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro. Well, Caetano, you're welcome.
So, hi everyone, do you see my screen? Yes, so thank you for this opportunity. Thanks for organizing the workshop. I'm currently in Utrecht. I'm from the Center for Global Challenges. I'm a colleague of Oscar, who is also co-organizing the project. And we hope to take this review forward by developing a new framework and applying it to possible case studies in connection to a project that is funded by Climate Kick called Proportion. So today I will present this review of innovation models and indicator frameworks. The key claim is that the frameworks, they are directly associated with how we understand innovation. And so I take as a starting point a paper that identifies 3 frames of innovation policies by Johann Schott and Ed Steinmiller. And I relate that to the indicator frameworks that emerged. And then I show those limitations and argue that the 3rd frame is in need of a new type of approach. So I think it's very similar also to the understanding that just a
presented before. There are lots of alignments, but I hope that I can raise some new insights. So why do we need innovation indicators? We should always begin with this, because sometimes it seems that innovation indicators or innovation indexes are ending in themselves, or at least they tend to be used like that, when they actually are basic indicators. They want to indicate something. So the first reason is the scientific reason related to understanding the nature of the science technology innovation process. So it's a more reflexive type of use of indicators. The second is the political reason. So it is also related to accountability, and but increasingly for the need of evidence for formulating and executing public policies. And the third is the business reason, which is related to corporate strategies and to support investment decisions. We can claim that now there is a need for a new reason, which is to assess innovation in relation to transformational objectives, in relation to societal aspirations, and also so not only to quantify innovation processes, but also to qualify it. And that kind of qualification is absent from the way we've been measuring the innovation process. There are two quotes here from the European Energy Agency that illustrate this need. There is a gap between the monitoring data and indicators and knowledge required to support transitions, between what we have as indicators and the knowledge that we need. Then the other quote also claims something similar, that there is a need to identify some early warning signals for positive social change. This might include data on changing worldviews, also like the discourses mentioned before by Steve, and values among young people, data on increased participations, metrics of growth and expansion, and so on, that are represented in popular culture. So there is this ambition to understand the quality of innovation processes. And if we take as a starting point the paper on the three frames, there is here a basic theory of the innovation process, and each framework look at certain relationships, but not all. So the first frame, it would look at the relationship between research and development, innovation, and economic growth, and indirectly to the public welfare and clean environment. And the second frame then would have a more direct focus on the link between R&D and innovation. But what is needed is a more direct attention to the relationship between those activities and how to address the environmental and societal challenges. So the three frames, they emerge in different periods of time. The first one had a focus on providing incentives for markets to produce higher levels of scientific knowledge. And there are other aspects that I will not go through, but the key model that we used to understand the innovation process was the linear model. And that led to an input-output framework of innovation indicators represented by the Frascati manual, the technology balance of payments framework and the patent framework. Then we had the emergence of the models of the systems of innovation at the macro level, and the chain-linked model of innovation within firms at the micro level, and that led to the emergence of new indicator frameworks like the Canberra manual for human resources devoted to R&D, the Oslo manual, and the emergence of composite indicators. But now we have this new emerging frame of transformative innovation, which is about mobilizing the power of innovation to address societal challenges. It's not anymore about fixing market failures or systemic failures, but transformational failures. And for now, we still don't have a unified model of the innovation process, but we do have some quasi-evolutionary models. We could say the multi-level perspective on sustainability transitions is another model. In strategic niche management, another one. And there is still a need to develop new frameworks, and especially these official type of frameworks, for instance, put forth by the OECD. One such inspiration could be based on the transformative outcomes by Gosh and colleagues, which I will explore a bit in the end of this presentation. So these are the breaking down those indicator frameworks. There was initially a focus on inputs, then later on outputs, then a focus on the chain-linked model, and then the systemic model. I will jump the next slides to jump to my conclusions, given the short time we have. So the first thing to note is that the evolution of those indicators reflected and are influenced by the evolution of models. So focus on innovation inputs and outputs, the structure and functions of innovation systems, and then the capacity and capability of workers and organizations. And right now, what we need, and it's absent, is a focus on processes and directionality. Also, the frameworks, they reflected and influenced the evaluation frameworks. So given those goals, and especially the policy goals, they also led to particular ways that we would evaluate policy. First, based again in input and output additionality. And I recommend tomorrow on session 7, Christoph Brodnik and Michael Linges will present this in more details. It's connected to our research. And the first frame led to, for instance, evaluation framework based on cost-benefit analysis, directly associated with the identification of market failures, whether the cost of the market failure would be lower than the benefit accruing from addressing this failure. Then the second framework would be in terms of the evaluation, in terms of the creation of structures, could be in terms of a network analysis or less sophisticated types of methods, or a focus on behavioral additionality as a means of addressing these system failures. And now, again, the frame 3, the type of evaluation, it was also mentioned by Steve, it requires also aspects of monitoring, a continuous monitoring, leading not only to accountability, but to learning what to do if the policy indicates or the indicators reveal some policy failures. So I began by saying that the indicators are not ends in themselves, but they tend to be subverted, and affecting those indicators often becomes the policy goal. So that's something that we have to have in mind also, how to develop a new transformative innovation framework that is not subverted and actually is meaningful in terms of assessing the impact of those policies. This gap in what we have in our knowledge relates to the fact that the innovation process in itself is still a black box, despite all attempts to open this black box. And in particular, the directionality towards addressing challenges and promoting transformational goals are still shadowed. So we are in this project using this assessment as a starting point to identify the gaps and try to develop a new indicator framework that allow for the continuous monitoring, learning, and improvement of innovation activities and actions. So what are we doing in those two projects that are funded by the Climate Kick? First, we have a top-down exploratory process where we use this review to propose a new framework and then use existing data, for instance, the Climate Kick data set to test this framework. And the other one, we use the empirical cases to develop a monitoring and evaluation and learning framework, and then we try to improve this framework based on the review. I will finish with 2 slides just showing a bit of the motion project, what we've been doing. We start with a theory of change. I will not go into the detail of it. A theory of change relates inputs to activities, to outputs, outcomes, and in this case, we add a layer of transformative outcomes that ultimately lead to an impact. And we need, in this policy, specific policy about sustainable shared mobility, we identify 4 pathways leading to different outcomes. And we are developing this framework by establishing mechanisms that relate the outputs with the outcomes. So this appear here in this small symbol here, and also in the middle 2 pathways as well, and breaking them down. So we have a method for evaluating one of the transformative outcomes based on network theory, and the other one, it's about changing practices. So we did, we could say even an algorithm. It's the final slide. I will finish 1 minute, 30 seconds, sorry. That relates the learning and unlearning processes with changing expectation dynamics and the circulation of knowledge. And to apply this framework, we use a participatory workshop with our counterparts, consultants and policymakers involved in SUSMO. And this is just to illustrate. Here, it's about a brainstorming to identify possible indicators for each of these criteria for evaluating the network and changing practices. And we then prioritize these indicators, and we are now in a phase then to collect the data and try to use it for learning and monitoring purposes. Just to mention finally that tomorrow my colleague Carla Pallavicino will present in session 8 more details of this work. Thank you very much. Thanks for thinking a bit more.
No, thank you very much, Caetano. Well, finally, we have the presentation of Francisca May. She is from the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies, Johan Liljeström Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies in University of Potsdam. The presentation is tipping points in transitions of socioeconomic systems. Please, Francisca, welcome, and thank you very much for your presentation.
Unmute myself first, of course. All right. So yeah, hello everyone. Good afternoon from Germany. Thanks so much for having me and giving me the opportunity to present our research today. So I hope you can see my slides. Johan Liljeström and we investigate tipping points in socioeconomic and socio-technical systems, specifically the transition of coal communities in West Germany. And our research is part of the Tipping Plus project, which is funded by the European Union's Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Program. And I would like to present the draft framework for investigating tipping points today. So for the sake of time, I will just jump right into it. My presentation will start with our definition of tipping points and the research question. Before presenting a set of preliminary indicators, I will introduce our analytical framework and the 3 dimensions for analysis. My presentation will end with some challenges we encountered on the way and some open questions. So I'm sure everyone has experienced a tipping point in their lifetime. The current global pandemic is certainly a drastic example, with tipping points in various countries where the increasing number of people infected ultimately leads to the collapse of national health systems. Another well-known tipping point was the reunification between East and West Germany, which actually celebrated its 30th anniversary just 2 days ago. So the pressing questions associated with these examples is actually, could we have known and recognized the tipping point before and so influence it? We believe that the added value in recognizing tipping points is to determine why and when a system follows one or another trajectory, and to understand what interventions in which context succeed in tipping a system to specifically a low carbon trajectory. And of course, this will ultimately help us to develop recommendations for regions in transition. So empirical examples and a review of literature led us to the following definition. Tipping points are moments in time in which a system fundamentally and irreversibly changes its structure and future dynamic. Tipping points are embedded in specific contexts and triggered by specific interventions, which ultimately lead to positive or negative trajectories. So I already touched on the overarching question, is it possible to measure tipping points? And to be more specific, what indicators, and that's our research question, what indicators will help to identify the moment ex post when a system tips to a low carbon trajectory? So Drawing on the literature, we found basically 3 key dimensions relevant for identifying tipping points. Firstly, the context dimension. So every tipping point happens in a specific context, which is made up of economic, social, and cultural elements, and the conjunction or alignment of events that initiate a certain development or a certain change. So for example, in the socioeconomic situation, the former GDR had significantly deteriorated towards the end of the 1980s, and the population's dissatisfaction with the individual opportunities and political freedom had grown significantly, so that the incumbent narrative of the Communist Party was no longer valid or was actually challenged. So that's a certain context which is about to change. The second dimension we identify as tipping interventions, which we understand as deliberate actions that trigger change and influence the system's development significantly. We find that interventions are predominantly policy or political actions. However, of course, there are also activities by key actors that influence the trajectory of a system. Another example here, the introduction of the German Renewable Energy Act and the feed-in tariff for solar PV was a significant intervention that had global impact on the cost of solar, paving the way for a tremendous cost reduction of the technology and basically its global distribution. Thirdly, the impact of the tipping point, which either shows a positive or a negative, basically shows the positive or negative consequences for human societies. Again, the example from the former GDR, which actually saw its industry collapse after reunification, leading to mass unemployment and a massive migration to West Germany in the 1990s, which basically is some sort of a negative tipping point with negative consequences for the population there. So what we wanted to do, or what I was trying to do, is to illustrate these 3 dimensions in a framework. And just to summarize it in a nutshell again, so a development happens in a specific context, which is then influenced by specific tipping interventions. And the interventions ultimately lead to a trigger tipping point, or potentially also several tipping points that lead in our case, or what we are looking at, towards a positive trajectory with specifically a new context, so changed system conditions. Another example here, because I think always examples illustrate things much easier, and I hope you can follow me there. So another example from Germany, specifically the Ruhr region, which had to phase out coal by 2018. And here the context is the city of Essen, which was historically strongly dependent on black coal mining and steel industry that had shaped the socioeconomic context and the cultural identification in the region. The economic decline of the industry complex already started in the 1960s due to the global developments, but the tipping intervention was when the accelerated energy transition triggered key stakeholders to come to the agreement to end black coal subsidies by 2018. This decision then created a strong sense for the need of a new vision and a new narrative in the region. And Essen basically started promoting a new vision, and the vision actually of a green city, so moving away from coal and steel to becoming the greenest city in this region. This vision then eventually manifested in Essen's application for the European Green Capital Award in 2017, which was successful. And this is what we consider actually then a tipping point, because Essen was able then to implement more than 450 sustainability projects under the motto, "A steel city goes green." Although significant environmental impacts remain to be seen, winning the award that tipped the city towards a low carbon trajectory. and specifically emphasized essence green commitment, which is then projected in its new image and vision citywide, but also nationally and internationally. So how can we measure tipping points? So as mentioned, there are those 3 dimensions I introduced earlier. And what we did, we developed a short list of indicators for each of them. I don't want to go into very much detail here. Just for the sake of time, I will only touch on a few.
Oi.
Who's that in the background? That's a bit disturbing, actually. In the context dimension, we found actually that it is important to focus not only on quantitative indicators, but more so on trends and changes of qualitative aspects, such as narratives and visions of key stakeholders. For example, to ask and to identify what are the mainstream narratives and discourses, and are there potential niche actors that hold a new vision and introduce a new vision. So from a former coal region, there are certain specific attachments to coal and associations with coal. But what are new visions, or what are new narratives that might emerge in those contexts?
Francisca, sorry,
yeah?
can you? We have only 1 minute. Can you
sure.
begin close, please?
Yes,
Thank
yes,
you.
sure. So I have 2 more slides. So yeah, so then coming to the intervention indicators. Which are basically what I said before. We consider interventions mainly policy interventions, but obviously there are also other ways of intervening into a system, which I've mentioned before. And then impact indicators, they are more quantitative in our understanding. So yeah, identifying changes, significant changes in demographics, in the employment rates, income levels, and GDP. And just my last slide here is about those challenges that we encountered. So obviously the tipping point research is work in progress, and we identified yeah, a number of problems or issues. So in order to identify an actual tipping point, there is this issue of potential sequences of tipping points and tipping interventions. Then we found that there is an issue of scale, so the local versus the global scale, and then the question of systemic change. And lastly, there's also the question around what is an adequate timeline in a socioeconomic system in order to remain relevant to our current context and derive useful recommendations. So what is an adequate timeline to identify tipping points? Yeah, that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much, Francisca, for your interesting presentation. Well, Christian, the mic is all yours.
Thank you, Gabriel. I'm going to share my screen now. I think you will be able to see that now. Yes. Can you see the screen? Yes. So I'm just going to explain first a couple of things about where I'm coming from in order for you to understand my comments and my questions to you. I think that's going to help you to understand that I'm coming from this kind of science practice, interface logic. So my questions are coming from there, and I think it could be useful for you in terms of the type of inputs for your research. So what I do is I'm working in a kind of a policy lab that is the Transition Hub. And what we do is that try to use a system innovation approach to make policy making accessible and useful for practitioners in terms of different type of science-based process. So we work as a policy lab, we use science policy practice interface, we co-design with them. And we provide like knowledge services to do many of the things that you described, for example, evaluation, monitoring, co-design, and also trying to understand the system's evolution over time. We work with cities and regions, and we do that as part of a learning by doing approach. And something that we have learned, and this is why I'm participating here, is that we really try to make the work that researchers as you are doing more accessible in terms of practice-based knowledge. And we understand that there is a need for adaptation, for creating something useful in terms of scientific knowledge for practitioners. And that means prototyping and implementing actions with policymakers by using that knowledge adapted to them. And by so that we learn and we write papers with you guys as well as part of an applied research. So there is an issue here about that some of the things that you were mentioning, like for example, developmental evaluation, or the work that we are doing with Caetano, or the project on tipping points. It's a little bit what we call this issue about applied and translational research that is more common in medicine, but in science and technology studies should be more common as well. And also putting that as part of a collaborative multi-stakeholder arena. We put that knowledge in practice with cities and regions. And we try to make a service out of that to help them for problem solving phase, okay, science-based approach, and we label that as knowledge as a service. Okay, so that's the kind of the place where I'm coming from. I'm going to highlight the kind of key issues that I see from the different papers, and I'm going just to point a couple of questions that comes to my mind through the reading and the presentation. So these are the three ones. So on the first one, I really appreciate that you brought this the sustainable transition experiment as a suggested approach. But something that I really appreciate from the experiment is that is kind of a space for bringing new practices and new knowledge, but as a kind of a necessary step, not as something that is just experimentation for experimentation. So what I see there, and I think that I would like to know from you, is this kind of tension between transdisciplinary research and cross-organizational collaboration, because those aspects are experimentation. One experimentation is working together and the other is trying to make it useful for other type of organizations that are not research. So I actually discussed this with Drift many times, for example. So I see that there is an element there that is connected to the kind of approach that you facilitated in your paper about evaluation for learning versus evaluation for accountability, because if there is a learning process, there is this kind of interaction with the problem owner or the user or the project. So I like this issue about empowerment, evaluation, and facilitated dialogue, but my question from my side, that's why I explained before where I'm coming from, is who ran the evaluation and for who? Okay, in terms of that, the learning and adaptation in real time that you mentioned, is how you understand that. It's an evaluation that can be even run by the practitioners in the future, and this is part of the learning. So that's why I put the competence kit there. In terms of who can run that evaluation and who can run this kind of process for learning. Finally, I think I'm going to email you about this issue about discourse and evaluation, because I really like this issue about diversity and reflection, and something that we are actually working from both sides, from practitioner side, but also from science side, and trying to understand this idea about negotiating meaning. Okay, so for example, in the case of the transformative outcomes that Caetano mentioned, is that how you can make some concepts that are very powerful attractive for practitioner, how you define shielding, or for example, circulation in practice that makes sense for them. So in terms of that, I'm very curious about the process tracing suggestion in terms of the role of knowledge management. how you capture, for example, in this process tracing, the kind of the different understanding of what is going on in terms of this issue about the discourse, because it could be that there is kind of parallel discourse and whatever, like repertoires of different wordings to understand that the process is different from different point of view. So that's kind of my reflections actually on the first paper. Gabriel, should we allow Steve to answer, and we open for questions, or I can move to the other one?
I think that it's important that you make all the presentation and then.
Okay, good, perfect.
Okay.
So on this one, I'm going to be short because I'm kind of, well, I'm part of those projects. So I think, Caetano, something that I understand that you can focus maybe in the questions or further explanation is this challenge of measuring transformative process require alternative methods, okay? Because you really highlight this issue about moving from a static view to a different type of logic. So what is the challenge at the kind of the methods when you are trying to measure something that is moving all the time, okay? Like it's a kind of a long flows of information rather than static elements that you can measure. And on the double process that you have in terms of models of innovation, the different frames and theory-based framework, and the practice-based innovation framework, this is a discussion that we had before. If we consider that this is about a socio-technical system transformation, and if policies are not going to be, at least in Europe, fully funded by the public government, like the Green Deals, and we are going to have roles of the private organizations like the financial sector or the industry, how we can incorporate other perspectives as corporate social responsibility, for example, in terms of like the innovation is not just going to be funded by the government, okay? It's going to be funded by other organizations. So I'm moving to the last one. So I really appreciate on this one, bringing this element about a timeline in terms of the tipping point and how the overall transformative process can be understood in terms of dynamics of intervention. That is a kind of a very attractive concept to work with practitioners. And I like, and I have been using just a little bit, so that I'm very curious about tipping points as a conceptual and methodological element to this scale change, like a turning point and decision-making process. So my questions on this conceptualization, by coming from, I'm based in Brussels, so I cannot avoid to think about the European policy on that, is on this when, why of the intervention and the logic of scale. And you mentioned this issue about sequence. And I really like, because I just wonder, by considering multi-level governance configurations like the EU, okay, that there are already kind of tipping points in time, but are activated in sequence. Can we think about interconnected tipping point or a concept, because there is a reaction of different tipping points that are interconnected, and there is one that trigger kind of a process. And the last question or the last comment is I really like the conceptualization and the relation that you are doing in terms of impact, context, and interventions. But again, it comes to my mind about the interventions are based on the capacity to make it happen, or the agency, and the agency most of the time is related to the availability of resources. So I just wonder if in terms of the analysis that you are doing in terms of indicator framework and impact, context, and intervention, is there any way to include flows of resources? So my question is, what about the availability of resources and the dynamic of resources that could be financial, knowledge, but also materials, like actually any other kind of element when you talk about environment, as part of this explanation of transformation by focusing tipping point? Can you ignore the availability and the dynamic of resources, and if you cannot, how you can incorporate that in your analysis? I hope that I have done that in right time. So yeah. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Christian. We have only 10 minutes. Automatically, this platform will bring us all the people here in 10 minutes. Please, we have very, very little time, but with this time, if you can answer the most questions that you can, maybe 4 minutes for each one. The other questions that you can respond or answer, they are important nevertheless, but please, if you want, Stephen, maybe to begin.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I guess on a process note, I love this way of doing it. I'm going to recommend that this is done at every panel presentation I'm part of. I love that reflection at the end. I guess just a couple of quick things. In terms of the who runs the evaluation and for who, unfortunately, a lot of that just depends on where the money comes from. And the funder determines what kind of evaluation is required, and that's a problem. In terms of who can actually do it, though, there's been interesting work that Kim Slater at University of Toronto has been doing on taking the evaluation framework that I have developed with John Robinson, which looked at the layers of process and effects and transition impacts, and developing what she calls a light touch version, something that NGOs and local projects can do on themselves through a web-based survey, a short interview, and obviously not as in much depth as having a PhD student work on it for 4 years, but something that actually allows organizations on the ground to be able to do that. So I think we need to be thinking about, in terms of a competence kit, more of a range of different types of evaluation for different types of knowledge users. I guess your piece around the tension between TD and the cross-organizational collaboration and the idea of experimentation being just a step, I think you're exactly right. And this is where developmental evaluation and assessment can also come into play. So for example, with the Energy Futures Lab, they really thought that what they were doing was created, like in NLP terms, creating a protected niche for innovation to be able to get and develop new ideas about energy transition. But when we asked people about how much the EFL had actually contributed to moving ideas forward, they said the EFL hadn't really contributed too much. The ideas would have happened anyway. But what they said was that because of participation in this project, the implementation of the ideas had been accelerated because they were able to make connections and build networks and actually implement these things and have time to work on it together. So by thinking about doing that assessment and feeding that back in real time, the project was able to shift, instead of thinking of itself as an innovation incubator, thinking of itself more as a networker, convener, connection hub kind of thing. So that can sort of help with bringing those different organizations together. But maybe, I guess the final piece that I'll mention is the Energy Futures Lab was a bit unique in this kind of transition experiment world. It was not an academic driven project. It was similar to some of the work that Drift does, where they're really hired to sort of implement those kind of projects. But I was studying the EFL, but it was run by an NGO with money that came from an oil and gas company foundation. So I think that's also something for us to be careful about when we're running these kind of labs, when the labs are starting from within an academic institution, that leads to inevitable challenges. So I'm thinking about, and there's been lots and lots of work around in different disciplines about how to break down those barriers. But I think something specifically in this particular realm, we need to be very careful of who's framing the idea, who's framing the challenge, who's bringing the money, who's hiring the staff, who's doing the facilitation. All that really matters. And I know Gavin McCrory and some colleagues at Chalmers, they're trying to build up doing a lot of secondary literature reviews on research around labs, trying to sort of pull out that data, because there's been very, very little work on the implications of that. Like, it seems obvious that where the money comes from is going to influence the project, but there's surprisingly little empirical research on in what ways does it do that, and what happens if an NGO is facilitating versus a professional consultancy versus a bunch of academics. So I think collectively we could put more work into that. Sorry for,
no,
hours, but
thank you.
I'll shut up.
Thank you.
Love to hear what my other co-presenters had to say. I really love your presentations, by the way.
At the contrary, so sorry for the lack of time here. And well, Francisca, Caetano, who wants to
Let me try to be very brief, 30 seconds, then I can talk with Christian later in person. But there are two aspects. The first one is that when you're talking about indicator framework, there are several aspects to consider. First of them, which I think I tried to unveil a bit, was the ontology behind how they encapsulate a worldview, both in terms of what the world is made of, but also in terms of some ethical elements relating means to ends, so to do with the goals of the framework. Then there are some definitions, some identification of proxies based on this worldview and collection methods, but also there is a question of its use and what's the added value of it. And that relates to also to the second point I would like to make. You mentioned certain types of approaches that have indicators like corporate social responsibility, responsible research. And the fact is that they may be useful, they may unveil certain aspects, but the biggest question is that what to do when you use them for an assessment of a certain policy or strategy. If you say, well, a company is not scoring high in corporate social responsibility, then so what? Or if we use a certain innovating framework and we are, let's say, a country or a city is not scoring high in an innovation index, then so what? Should I try what do I need to change? Is it the activity? Is it more resource? So there is little guidance for what to do in terms of processes to modify and become more transformational. So instead of focusing on this type of indicators, we want to focus on processes to have clues of what to change and what is not going well when you want to achieve some transformational aspects. But I'll finish here. Thank you.
Thank you, Caetano. Francisca, go on, please.
Yeah, so thanks so much for your feedback. So I wanted to try to answer quickly the last question on resources and how we approach this question of capacity for transformation. So I think that's very, very important, and I think it will be to some extent captured in the approach. So looking for specifically the stakeholders and the local narratives and discourses, and through that identifying who are the stakeholders and what their resources, their availabilities and capacities for change are actually. So I think it will lie very much in in our approach and in the methods used, which to a great extent, what I also mentioned in my presentation, will be qualitative. Obviously, there is a need for quantitative indicators, but yeah, I think it will remain with using qualitative indicators and measures.
Thank you very much, Francisca. Well, we have 2 more minutes. If someone from the audience wants to make a statement, a comment, a question, maybe Christian wants to.
I hope the audience can ask and use 2 minutes for a couple of questions or comments.
Somebody wants to mention, or Johan has a question.
Johan, please.
Well, I have a question about the tipping points, whether we can identify them ex ante instead of ex post.
Johan, that was exactly my question to Francisca I wanted to make, so thank you for raising it.
So I think that's a very good question, and something that I hope will this project be able to answer to some extent. So they're actually I think we have 22 partners in the project, and I think about the same number of case studies across Europe as well as internationally. And then there are actually some projects and some case studies that are about to see a tipping point. However, I'm a little bit skeptical about it. So we actually investigate tipping points from the past. And that's also my question about the timeline. But it's certainly more challenging to anticipate tipping points in the future, because from my perspective, you can only know if you reached or if you crossed the tipping point, when time has passed, and actually to some extent significant time, because then you will see if the trajectory goes up or down, or like a certain development in the trajectory. So I think it's challenging and difficult, but maybe some of the examples from specifically the colleagues in Norway and in Greenland who are about to see a tipping point might shed some light on that. So I'm sorry, I can't give a definite answer here.
I just wonder, by coming from Brussels, if the anticipatory regulation and the political cycle flows from the European Union is not a proxy of an ex-ante tipping point, where you can already address that this regulation and targets are going to happen in that year, and also the money flows from top down is going to happen. So that could be like a kind of a proxy somehow, at least in Europe.
Well,
you know that billions of euros are going to be available for that sector and that country in that moment. So, and the regulation is going to be more strict. So it's, at least it's a context for identifying a potential tipping point.
Correct. Yeah. So, like what I think and what we are after is identifying specific tipping points for communities and regions that are moving towards a positive trajectory. And often, like money doesn't always mean that kind of the trajectory is going to be positive, or it's going to be kind of a tipping point in a positive sense, so that the region is going to be prosperous afterwards. So I think it's still something where there are a lot of context indicators which play an important role. So for instance, if also kind of there is an innovation drive in the region, if there is kind of if the stakeholders or the local entrepreneurs are the right ones that are able to kind of use the money to a certain extent, that kind of the trajectory and the development in the region can become positive. So, for instance, in Germany, the Lausitz, which is East German coal region, is going to receive a lot of money, but still, it's still unclear if this money is going to help this region to move towards a positive trajectory, because the understanding and the sentiments against this change in this region are so great. So there are lots of questions about that. So I don't think that money will fix it alone.
Francisca, we just received all our colleagues here at the session. Well, I want to thank you very much to Christian, to Francisca, to Steve, and Caetano for your presentations. And we have to move on with this agenda today in this workshop. We have here all our colleagues, I think. Mauricio, please correct me.
Yes, all the people are here.
Okay, this is the last part of our session. In this part, we want to present all the results that we had in every sessions that we addressed. We had 4 sessions, and all the commentators from the sessions, we're going to present the results or the comments, or I don't know, the ambient of the discussion in those sessions. I think that is important, because with those comments and those general summaries of those sessions, we can in some way try to make an state of the art of this part of the workshop. I think that we can begin with this issue, and I think that the best is to follow the order of the sessions. What do you think, Oscar?
Yeah, I think that is fine, Gabriel.
If you want
start with Luciano.
Yes,
Sorry,
you
Elena.
can use the slide. You can use the slide when we write the names of every session, just for stating the same order, right?
Yes, you're right. I'm going to present first. The first session was this. Luciano, please help us with this measuring transitions. How was your session? Tell us, please.
Hi, Gabriel. Hi, everyone. Our session was intense. We didn't have any minute to breathe, but it was a very good session. Very good presentations, and very good problems. The discussion was around what are we measuring at, what are we looking at as a transition. And we have a good and great answer from the presenters. But I want to make from my point of view, the key or the new concepts I learned today, and that could be a good tool set for measuring transitions. From Claudia, I think that the agency concept is very important. Being an engineer, for me, talking about agency is not common, but I think it's very important, a very important concept of sociology and of observation. But Claudia not also talk about agency, but about distributed agency around rural local dynamics on part of Colombia that is called Boyacá. That is the source of water for the country. Most of the water of the country came from that territory, but also for minerals. So the problem is how to work the conflict between sectors, economic sectors, trying to solve regional or national scales problems or needs, but affecting local social territories. So a conflict arises. The conflict is the social movement versus the sectors. And what Claudia is trying to research, to explain, to try to figure out is how that social movements with distributed agency can make a transition to another way of using resource. So she's trying to measure resource mobilization in a territory based on transition theory and on regional theory, on social analysis. So this is a very interesting work that can give us some clue about rural problems and about scales problems. It's not an easy one, not at all, because if you have into account the population problem and the resource scarcity and the resource demand from different territories, the local view, it's in conflict with the global view. So that's the first paper from Claudia. Claudia is from Colombia, and at the end we will have a new way of thinking on how to design maybe a new type of policy based on new type of measuring. Okay, the second and the third paper are very related, but mainly by the method of the way Alexandra and Pirawat are working with the data they expect to collect. Alexandra has a very interesting problem based on South America or Latin America. She is clear that it is not a problem exclusive to that region, but it's a problem that is exclusive to most of the cities in the world that maybe doesn't have a good way of measuring the way the public transport system is working. And they introduced two interesting dimensions of that new way of evaluation of public transport system based on sustainability. The first one is, as I say at the introduction at the beginning of the morning, what she calls paratransit, the informal public transportation. This is a huge problem in most of the cities. And the other one is gender violence in public transport. So those two are not the main problem, but she will be having a lot of information and a lot of index working with, but she also wants to take into account those two. And then a third dimension will be system effectiveness. And this is another way of relating the work of Alexandra with the work of Pirawat, because they will be taken into account and they have discovered that the human dimension on the measuring, it's key. In some sense, the today indexes or today way of measuring are not taking seriously into account that dimension, the human and the social dimension of the indexes that are working with the way of designing public policy. So system effectiveness, gender violence, and paratransit are very interesting key concepts that they are here taken into account. We also discuss on that point that sometimes we're measuring the problem and we have to fix the problem. But knowing that at the end, the root problem, maybe it's another one, but trying to understand the problem that we see and live today and every day, it's important to try to understand why the root problem in the paper of Alexandra, for example, city planning, it's very important. So we're waiting to have the Alexandra index because it can give us a new way of thinking on the way the cities are thinking on their future. Okay. And the third paper from Pirawat, we have a wonderful presentation from Pirawat. She's working very, very close to the system development goals, in particular number 11. And with a clear argument on why he needs to work on the environmental and social dimension of sustainability. He has cleared that those two dimensions need more work, because we have a economic dimension very work with a lot of information and a lot of data, but in particular the environmental and social dimension of mobility are important. Key insights of this third paper for all of the participants are that energy and mobility in the future of the city are very close related, because if everybody will have a energy, electricity in particular generation in his house, or he also can have a mobile tool or a mobile technology related to energy. So we learn from Pirawat that we have to take into account energy and mobility, because it's a key factor for the future of policy also. And he's using and decided to work mainly with social practice theory, because, as I said, it takes human activities and aspirations and human aspiration at the center of the situation. So we also were working on where to get the data, and maybe they will be working with Medellin also. I'm based on Medellin, and the way we can contract data from Latin America and from Europe and other cities is very interesting. And at the end, as must be in a good session, we end with more questions than answers, and we think that we will have new tools at the end of these 3 projects. We will have new tools for measuring transitions.
Luciano, thank you very much for your presentation. And in order to follow up, Christian, please tell us how was our session, session 2. This session was directed to frame methodological approaches to measure transformations.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Oh, Christian. No, thank you.
I'm going to try to be short, and I'm going to try to highlight some of the main aspects of the discussion. Unfortunately, we didn't have too much time for the discussion, but I think we collect a couple of points that were very attractive for further discussion. On the first paper regarding evaluation for transition and transformation, I think there are 2 main aspects that we can highlight about the discussion and the presentation. One is the bringing for debate the understanding of evaluation of transition process from a kind of a learning point of view in terms of interacting with a broad set of actors. And we try to discuss about these issues about during the discussion rather than the presentation, the elements about the transdisciplinary research in transition, but also cross-organizational collaboration in terms of transition process, and how that's come together in terms of understanding evaluation as a process that is run depending on many factors, as who is providing the funding for the evaluation, or who is the owner of the project, and who is the beneficiary. So there are different elements there that I think are very attractive to discuss in terms of how this transdisciplinary and cross-organizational makes sense in practice. And I think there are a lot of room to discuss there in terms of the understanding of the learning process itself. In terms of the second presentation, well, there is a kind of an existing process of challenging the current status quo of the different frames for understanding innovation, and moving forward from static views of innovation process to more transformative type of process. Since I'm part of the project, it's kind of tricky for me to say more, but I try to be provocative with my colleague Caetano about bringing new perspectives from the kind of non-policy related aspects. And I think there is a lot of room to discuss there about the role of understanding much better the role of industry and finance in shaping innovation. Currently in Europe, just if we think in policy, less than 10 or I think 7% of R&D is funded by public organization, the rest is private. And in terms of the Green Deal, even in R&D, for each €1 that the European Union is going to put, the industry needs to put 2 or 3. So that means that it's changing the rule in terms of the how we measure innovation in terms of like the type of impact and the type of practices that we are putting forward. I think this is this pathway of understanding process for a new set of indicators in innovation is going to be very attractive to highlight this kind of new context for financing innovation. And I know that Johan has many things to say about this kind of panel for blended finance to funding innovation. On the last but not least, it was a very attractive presentation about understanding the concept of tipping points in terms of transitions and understanding the logic of interventions for transitions. It's an approach that is very much based on qualitative methodologies, but also by bringing conceptualization from different aspects of the system in terms of like understanding the context and a very clear logic for interventions. Part of the discussion was connected to the layer of the flows of resources, to understand how the tipping points are connected to the availability of resources that could be financial or not. And actually, you listened the last part of the discussion about how the availability of financial resources cannot be the starting point for a positive pathway, but still can be a tipping point. So that's a different thing. And this is kind of, yeah, I cannot avoid to say that kind of things because I'm coming from Brussels. But I think it's a very attractive discussion to bring the timeline element to the discussion about transition and indicators for understanding transformation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. We move on to the third session. The session was commented by Carmen Bueno. Carmen, tell us please, how was your session?
Let me put my camera and my microphone. Okay.
Okay.
Well, my session, the topic was niche case studies. And in fact, there was only one essay that dealt with the niche case studies. Although it was important to discuss what we can learn about transformative metrics in the three essays. Okay, so metrics, well, they were considered in very different ways. All of them were using a multi-dimensional system approach, but system had a very different definition for each of these papers. No, one was really a multi-dimensional sprue approach to transformative innovation, and some other had to do with regions, with the governance, the differences in governance in different regions in Colombia. So they want to construct a typology and in some way map the indicators and composite indexes that could help them to understand what's going on in different regions in Colombia. And the other one is modeling a huge system of different energy systems. Okay, so that was really, I think that is what we can learn from these three papers. So I'm going to start with the system of systems architecture methodology. Okay, I think it's really very interesting and very ambitious to try to interconnect 4 energy systems and integrate them in one complex megasystem. Okay, although this approach to system analysis is more centered on what transformative innovation approach will situate in the level of architecture landscape and on the regime level. So one of the questions I asked them was if it was possible, if it was consistent or compatible to analyze integrated energy systems and its transition outcomes, introducing differences between the regime and the niche level. No? So of course it's nothing that you can answer in 1 minute. So I hope that in some way they can go forward, because niche level, as we know, can have very important socio-technical consequences, as substituting or realigning or de-aligning the landscape and the regime of current systems. So I hope that they go through on that. And something else that was part of the discussion, it was they want to generalize the framework, okay, apply it in different systems. And one of the questions I asked them was if they were aware of the differences, systemic differences experienced between the global north and the global south, or even the gaps that still exist in the energy systems in developed countries between central and marginal areas. So I think I have more questions, although the project is really fascinating. Okay, and the second paper had to do with this regional analysis on governance, and one thing that they have, well, they presented a definition, and I wanted them to analyze it more. And they define regions in their paper as a socio-technical system hub, as well as transformative network. That means that they should map what is going on socio-technically in each region, and they have to have very clear criteria of what type of networking they will be doing. And one of their how can I say, things that they have to solve is the data they are using. No, they are now using the resources and indicators that they have on their hand, but they are trying to build new indicators. The importance is if the quality of information will be very important, because if they want to measure governance challenges and the transition in different regions, the index they are going to integrate has to be has to come with very reliable data. So, well, that's a huge challenge for them. And the last one, Fernando's case study, he's dealing with a very niche analysis, very ground. I mean, he's constructing the case, okay, all the transition, not only technical, but also social, all the relations, horizontal and relations between niche and regime. His challenge is how is he going to measure the transitions? He wants to measure, first of all, he's now elaborating a metrics in order to see transitions on sustainability and social justice, but maybe on the process, he will have to analyze other transformative outcomes that go hand in hand with the permanent evaluation of an experiment, as the SPRU approach considers it important. Okay, so also I think one of the important things that Fernando presented was the differences between the North and the Global South when dealing with socio-technical complex systems. So I think he's presenting a very important question for all of us. Most of the papers were research being done in the global south. Okay. One thing that I mentioned him was that it is very important to know what type of metrics he's going to use to evaluate future outcomes in niche consolidation, because this project on water harvesting is a project that is maturing in a very in some way accelerated way, considering the instability in the public policy in Mexico. And I was asking him if he has a way to have these metrics to analyze replicability or expansion of this niche. Thank you. But it was very, very interesting.
Carmen, thank you very much. And finally, we have the last session guided by Oscar and commented by Maria Luisa. Maria Luisa, tell us, please, how was your session?
So thank you very much. It was a very interesting session and with very interesting presentations. I think here it's the central issue is the environmental issue and the concern about sustainability. And what we observed is that the main central concept of sustainability seems to be a common assumption, and all uses the concept of sustainability, but there is not really a clear definition about what is sustainability. And hearing now also the rest of the presentations, also the issue of transformation and transition. For me, it's not still clear what kind of transition to where is it, and which kind of ideas, basis this is called. So in this moment, when we are in a world of huge transitions and all what we have is a lot of crisis everywhere, in what is the biggest gap between rich and poor and inequality, and also increasing the environmental problems in a very strong way if we see the fires and the melting of the poles and the biodiversity loss. So there is really a concern about what is understood by environmental problems, and if these metrics and measurements are for the concern of life, or for what is it exactly for what we are doing this kind of work? Because also as a researchers, I think we have a strong ethical responsibility with knowledge and mainly with life itself. So I think this is the starting point to make the observances about what I heard. So the first presentation about synergies and trade-offs between SDGs, it was that Amir make very careful selections about the databases which are available, but at the end he also admitted that it's not clear what are these sustainable issues. So the measurements is a very strong discussion in the SDGs and how they can get in the in the global south. So there is also a conscience in the paper of the need of context-aware research, recognizing the inability of understanding causal effects by simple indicators. So I think there is a point where we have to go more deeply and see what are really the causes of these problems we have, and if indeed the SDGs can resolve that problems. So in the second presentation, the pattern discovery of climate and environmental policy indicators, there was the proposal to see how the firms react to environmental innovation issues, and the question is still there, and unfortunately we had no time to for the discussions as that. And the question is if there is really possible a win-win situation between environment and economics and what is the firms. So there's also again the big question about which is the basis of the theoretical framework and epistemological framework to really say, can say that there is a win-win situation, and how we can identify the innovations. So the question is it a problem of how the firms react, or is it a pattern to discovery really to guarantee better policies, which is still the question. If we see also what happens with the International Panel of Climate Change, where they have a lot of proof of climate change, but no still real long-term effective policy is done. And the last one is about futuring food and realizing transformative scenarios, which was the concern about food sharing. And it was also interesting what she presented about the food sharing. But although there is the question, how to make to make a meaningful space for inclusion of plural voices in transitions. Again, I think, and what the commentator Carmen was called, what she said in the last one, that it's really a different point of view from the global north and the global south, the positions, because of course we have to make the inclusion of plural voices in the transitions, but also there are different positions in potential agents, what we are observing. And here in the global south, there is, we have, as the Global Witness report showed in the last report, there is a systematical killing agents in this area. So how we can make the inclusions of the plural voices. And the question here will be also, how is the power distribution? So how we can really see how we can make this kind of transitions, if there is, how we can include in the metrics the power distribution. Is it possible to make it visible, the power in this metrics? Who has really the power to do the metrics and make the issues of what are the parameters with which is measured the problems? I think that is a very important question here. And well, I think I let it be here in this point. Thank you very much.
Maria Luisa, thank you very much for your comments. Well, I just want to remember that we are working on an agenda. This scenario is not for solve controversies or solve the most important questions. We are just trying to make a landscape of all these kinds of proposals. We are seeing that talking about metrics and measurements is not an apolitical thing or something that is very far away from those kind of controversies in social ideologies or social different ways of thinking. Well, I don't know, I want to propose you, we have 15 more minutes. Maybe if the audience of all these sessions want to remark something, highlight something that you can say that is important to take in account in this agenda? I don't know, or maybe some questions that you can address to try to solve these issues. I don't know if anyone wants to make some comment about it, about the sessions you participate.
Yeah, if you want to extend, like, you know, the comments, or maybe, for instance, in my breaking section, we don't have enough time to answer all the questions as well, because now, like, the commentators did many questions and comments, so it's also here the opportunity to try to think about it all together and to discuss. So if any of you want, I mean, from the presentators want to make a point, I think that is a very good moment or a reflection about the discussion that we had today.
Gabriel.
Sí, Luciano.
Hola. Hello.
Adelante.
Yes, during my presentations and the presentation I was commenting and I was learning from, I was thinking on a systemic way about opportunity and about delay. I may explain myself. At some point, I was worried about trying to measure and try to explain transformation that are occurring or maybe could occur. But I was thinking on the roots problem, and I was willing to see or to hear about, for example, population dynamics, because I always try to think on population dynamics. What is happening now is incredible, immense, the immense consequences, because at this point we are observing radical fertility indicators in the world. So all of the population models that are at this moment are being revisited and revised, because maybe we will have a very, very different population dynamics in the next 2 or 3 decades. And that makes most of the problem that we're facing now different, other problems. So I think in the agenda you are proposing and everybody's working on, I think this is important to think on that, on delay or on root problems that are behind the what are we measuring or what are transforming that measure. That's my point at this point.
Thank you, Luciano.
Thank you, Luciano, very much. Luis Fitzgerald says, thank you for the inputs and organization. I was hoping to have had more time for discussion and collaboration. Could you please explain the future plans, steps in for potential and working collaboratively on research agenda together? Well, we are working after this workshop. We have to collect all these ideas and papers and comments, etc. And then we want to make first we want to make like a proceedings book. It's not exactly a proceedings material, but with this, I think that the people is interested in, we can share a first schema of this proceeding book. I don't know how to call it. And then we are going to present this the next year in an Latin American event. Is Métricas 2021. This is the first steps. Maybe we go more complex with this agenda, but this is our first ideas, I think.
Yes, I want to say something, Gabriel, and it's like a first idea, but it's not a close idea. So what we think is like, it's important to try to write an agenda, but the idea is to try to do it all together. So we are welcome. I think that is 2 follow-ups. The first follow-up is like to be tomorrow in the end of the last section. We are going to try to think about it, like if maybe we want to write a policy brief, or maybe we want to make just memories, or we just want maybe to write, as Gabriel is suggesting, a a kind of book when we are like describing this discussion. Or we can think as well, if some of you are interested on working on a special issue, and we can apply all together to try to get a publication of all papers. Of course, that we need to improve all the papers. So it's different ways that we can think about it, and the idea is to try to build up that with all of you. I think that I'm very agree with Luisa. I was guilty about it, about the timing. There was not a lot of discussion. But I think that these first insights, like these first comments, they are also useful, like to think and try to improve the paper's contributions. And as well, I think that it could be useful in the different scenarios that I'm describing, like maybe the policy brief, maybe this special issue, or whatever that we think that is important to do. But of course, we need to build up all together. That is the idea, like to try to see what to do, because as you see, it is very diverse. Very different cosmologies, epistemologies, and different ways to problematize like transitions and sustainability. So it's a challenger by itself, like to lead, because it's like different points of view and this kind of thing. So we need to do it kind of together. That's like my main point here.
Okay, I agree with Ali and Luis. It's a very short time for all the discussions and controversies, but as I said, I think that we are only just trying to collect all the visions around the problem. And sorry for that, very sorry. It's but in all these kind of events, you have all these limits to the time.
Gabriel.
Yes, Eliana, please.
I would like to tell to all the presenters, participants, and indeed you and Oscar, all this great day of our workshop. We're being prepared during all the year, thinking the best concepts on how to include in every session, the best similar points for different, types of way of thinking on universities, institutions, theories, challenges, and this is really, really great. We hope tomorrow can continue with the discussions and maybe think in a future discussing what is the next step of our agenda, and maybe we need to learn more about what transitions and transformative theories we have to include and introduce in our own experiences and professional, technically as a researchers in every moment of our interchange with other disciplines. So I cannot say just to be so close. No. Just I'm very, very happy to share with you, with Oscar, with Matthias, and with these great participants. In every session, I think they were discussing and learning many things.
Okay, Alejandro, you want to say something?
He was
sorry. I thought that you raised your hand. Okay, well, I think that we have more 7 minutes, but if you don't have any comments, we can back tomorrow. We want to thank you very much. I think that we made it for today, and we can find tomorrow at 8 o'clock at this part of the world, and in Europe at 12. At 12, yeah, no, 2 at 2.
Depends if it is in the UK or
UK 2 p.m. and Holland it's
3
p.m.
3.
Yeah. 1 hour of difference, right?
Yeah, there is the second challenger about the timing, because we are in 2 different regions. We cannot have a complete day, so it's just half day. So anyway, see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Bye, take care, be safe.